everybody, welcome into another prediction video. This is for week 7 of this college football season. This is my college football pick'em, part of an ongoing series I've been doing. These games are based on ESPN's college football pick'em game. Each week I pick 10 of the biggest games on the college football slate, and boy, this might be the best week yet. So without further ado, let's get into the first matchup of the day. And that would, of course, be number 10 Penn State versus number 5 Michigan. This one is the big noon kickoff, and it can be seen on Fox. Starting with the Nittany Lions, Penn State is coming off their bye week, and this will be their toughest test of the year for the Nittany Lions. The offense is led by quarterback Sean Clifford, who has played fine to start the year, and the running game has been the big improvement for the Nittany Lions, which is currently averaging 192.6 rushing yards per game. On the defensive side of the ball, Penn State is holding opponents to 14.8 points per game, which ranks top 5 in the Big Ten. This defense has allowed the second fewest rushing yards per game in the conference. Now, when we take a look at Michigan, we'll see why that statistic is so important. Michigan is off to a 6-0 start for the second straight season. Quarterback J.J. McCarthy has the 12th best QBR in the nation, and he has only thrown 1 interception on the year. So, McCarthy, the young quarterback, has played well so far. However, this will be Michigan's biggest test as well. The run game for the Wolverines has been rolling as they are averaging 212.3 yards per game. We've all seen how well Blake Corum has been carrying it in that stable of backs. On the defensive side of the ball, Michigan is allowing 247 yards per game, including less than 100 yards rushing per game. So both of these teams have shown an ability to stop the run from the defensive perspective. Michigan also leads the Big Ten in sacks with 22 on the year, so an ability to get after the quarterback. There's a lot of questions from people in the media about Michigan's pass rush with the loss of Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo. Well, they're currently leading the conference in sacks, so they're off to a good start. Looking at the Football Power Index, Michigan is favored in this one, 73.3% chance to win this one, and I'm going to go with the Wolverines to get the win here. I think Michigan having that home field advantage, and another stat I'd like to pull out, another thing of note that's important to me, Penn State is coming off the bye. James Franklin has a 6-10 record off the bye at Penn State. He also has a losing record on the road. This is one of the toughest road environments in the Big Ten. This is one of Penn State's toughest road tests of the season. And I don't trust those numbers. I don't think, this could be different. This is also, if Penn State can pull off the win, this will be the first time that they have beat a top 5 opponent on the road since 1994. It was also against Michigan, but that 1994 team, if you're a Penn State fan, that was a pretty special team. So, hard to know if this will be the year, but I'm going to lean Michigan in this one, but I think this will be a great game regardless of the outcome. Moving on to our next game, it's number 19 Kansas versus Oklahoma. This one is a noon kickoff on ESPN2. Taking a look at the Jayhawks first. Kansas is coming off their first loss of the season. It's not normally you say that about Kansas football in mid-October. They will likely be without quarterback Jalen Daniels, who is suffering a shoulder injury. It was reported earlier in the week that Daniels would likely be out for the season, but those reports were disputed by Daniels himself. However, I believe that he is doubtful for this Saturday. Backup quarterback Jason Bean stepped in for Daniels last week against TCU. Bean looked well, and he had a lot of playing time last year, so quarterback Jason Bean shouldn't be a huge drop-off. Last week against TCU, he threw for 262 yards and 4 touchdowns. This offense has been very well. They've been playing well. They're averaging 39.8 points per game and over 200 rushing yards per game. Each of those ranks in the top 3 in the Big 12. So clearly one of the better offenses in the Big 12. On the defensive side of the ball, the Jayhawks are allowing an average of 26.3 points per game and nearly 400 yards per game. So kind of an ability to get into high-scoring competition, but they've had the offense so far to win most of their games. Taking a look at the Sooners now. Oklahoma is in shambles at the moment. Everybody across social media and the internet has just lambasted the Sooners, and rightfully so. If you watched any of that Texas-Oklahoma game last week, you saw how much of a goose egg Oklahoma laid. They've lost 3 in a row for the first time since 1998. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, Dillon Gabriel has been a full go in practice this week, and he is expected to play. He got knocked out in the TCU game 2 weeks ago and did not play last week. Now, I think that addition is important. I know some OU fans are not thrilled with the play of Gabriel, but I think him and Levy together worked well through those first 4 weeks. And I include that Kansas State loss because their offense played well in that game. We'll have to see if they can get back on track. Their running game has also been impressive if you just look at the pure averages, averaging over 200 yards per game on the ground. Now, that doesn't mean that, a lot of those statistics can be inflated by those first 3 weeks. But, if you look at the Texas game last week, almost nothing was impressive for Oklahoma. So that is of note that just because they have good numbers there doesn't mean that this will carry over. Looking at the defense for the Sooners, this has been a big struggle point, and it's kind of surprising with Brent Venables as head coach. They are allowing 29.2 points per game, and they allow the most yards per game in the Big 12. So they're one of the worst defenses in the Big 12. Looking at the ESPN Football Power Index, Oklahoma is favored in this one. 69.1% chance to win this game. Now, some things I think that could be influencing that favoring. It is at Memorial Stadium. Oklahoma, if you look at it just from a pure recruiting perspective, likely has the better roster. And the injury to Jalen Daniels could definitely be impacting this somewhat. So when we get to my pick here, I'm going to take Oklahoma. And some of you might be saying, this is outrageous. Kansas, after all, is America's team. That they've been crowned that. Everybody's rooting for Kansas, and as they should be. I would like to see Kansas win this game, but I think with Dillon Gabriel coming back and Jalen Daniels being out, it came down to the quarterbacks for me, and I think I struggle to believe that Oklahoma will lose 4 straight. Maybe that's me just being blinded by their sort of dominance throughout my entire college football fandom, but I think the Sooners will bounce back this week. They've got a home game against a good opponent. This will not be a cakewalk for Oklahoma, as Kansas has usually been in the past, but I do think the Sooners are going to win this one. Next on the docket, it's a Big Ten West showdown. It's Minnesota versus number 24, Illinois. This one is a noon game and can be seen on the Big Ten Network. How about Illinois? How about that throwback Illinois logo? This is the first time the Illini have been ranked in 11 years. That was the longest streak in the FBS. I believe the current streak belongs to Rutgers, but don't quote me on that. Let's get into this game here. Let's first take a look at the Golden Gophers. Minnesota is coming off a bye last week. Now this offense is led by veteran quarterback Tanner Morgan. He's been there for a very long time. They are averaging nearly 500 yards per game, and they have a top 5 rushing attack in the country. Now that rushing attack is going to get a key piece back. Mohamed Ibrahim is going to be returning this week. He went out, I believe, in that Michigan State game. It was sometime in late September, so he's been out with an ankle injury, but he's expected to be back, which is great news for Minnesota fans. On defense, the Golden Gophers have been outstanding. They are currently holding opponents to 8.8 points per game and the fewest yards per game allowed in the Big Ten. I realize here I said, and the fewest yards per game allowed per game in the Big Ten. I don't know how many per games I need there. Let's take a look at the Fighting Illini. Illinois, like I mentioned, they're ranked for the first time in 11 years, and last week in a win against Iowa, they lost several players to injury, including their cornerback, Tommy DeVito. On offense, Illinois has been effective at running the ball. They average 195 yards per game, which ranks 4th in the Big Ten. On defense, Illinois ranks 1st in the conference in points allowed per game and 2nd in the conference in yards allowed per game and sacks on the year. So these are 2 high-octane defenses that are putting up very good numbers, and this will definitely be a defensive struggle. This will be what you think of when someone says Big Ten football. It'll be between the tackles, ground and pound, physical play. Whoever can be more physical, I think, will get the win in this one. Looking at the Football Power Index, Minnesota has a 62.8% chance to win this game, and I'm going to go with the Golden Gophers. I like them to win. I think their offense is in a better position with Ibrahim coming back from injury. I think they'll be more effective at moving the ball than Illinois will be, especially if they're without their quarterback, but I do not think that Illinois' defense is just going to roll over, especially a Brett Bielema coach team. Coach Bielema is a great coach. He has proven that. So I think that Illinois and Minnesota, this will be a great game, but I think Minnesota has that slight edge because of their offensive capabilities. Moving to the next game now, this is one of the biggest, if not, this is the biggest game of the weekend. Number 3 Alabama versus number 6 Tennessee. This one is a 3:30 game on CBS. Now, this one, I'm told, is a rivalry game. Third Saturday in October. And for me, this has never meant a whole lot. I'm 21 years old. This rivalry has never really been a big deal in my college football fandom. Tennessee has not beaten Alabama since 2006. Will this be the year? Maybe. Let's break it down. Let's start with Alabama. They're coming off a narrow escape against Texas A&M. They won by 4 points, and it was a game in the fourth quarter. That was the third time this year we've seen them in a close game in the fourth quarter. Last week against A&M, they were favored by 24 points. That's how much they ended up scoring. A week before that, close game against Arkansas in the fourth. They ended up running away with that one. And then obviously, everyone remembers that Texas game. Now, the status of Bryce Young is the determination of who will win this game, I think. I'm not sure whether he'll play or not. I have not seen anything. They weren't really clear with whether he'd play last week or not. He was in uniform. He warmed up, but he didn't go. So I don't know what his status is. He suffered a shoulder injury. What game was that in? I can't remember the game that was in. I apologize. But this offense, they are averaging 44.3 points per game, 246.5 passing yards per game, and 257 rushing yards per game. Now, a lot of those numbers are put up with Bryce Young. We saw their offense be limited with Jalen Milroe at quarterback, who is more of a running style quarterback. Now, on the defensive side of the ball for the Crimson Tide, they are allowing 250 yards per game, which is the best in the SEC. That's the fewest. They are also holding opponents to 12.5 points per game. That ranks second in the SEC. Now, we know some of those big names, such as Will Anderson on that defensive side of the ball. Alabama, we know what they are. They're an absolute juggernaut, and they have struggled on the road. People will bring that up. Went to 4 overtimes last year against Auburn. We saw how they looked against Texas. When we saw how they looked struggling into the fourth quarter against Arkansas. Now, is Tennessee the team to take them down? Let's have a look. Tennessee, this is one of their best starts in a long time. This is the best start I've ever seen Tennessee football have. Now, like I mentioned, I'm 21 years old, so I don't have a long memory in terms of college football. The Volunteers offense, this is one of the best offenses in the nation. I would put them, Ohio State, and maybe even TCU in that mix. But those three offenses are on another planet. Tennessee is currently averaging 46.8 points per game. That's the product of hiring Josh Heupel as head coach. That is second best in the nation in points per game. They are also averaging 547 yards per game. That leads the nation. Quarterback Hendon Hooker has the third best QBR in the country, and on the defensive side of the ball, the Vols are holding opponents to 17.8 points per game, and they have earned 14 sacks on the year. Both of those are top 5 in the SEC. So both of these teams have shown an ability to slow down their opponents and score on their opponents at will. Let's take a look at ESPN's favorite here. ESPN's Football Power Index likes Alabama. They give them a 69.8% chance to win this game. Time for my prediction. Tennessee is a great team. This is going to be Alabama's toughest test of the year. This environment is going to be insane. They will be singing Rocky Top all night and all day, probably till next Saturday, if Tennessee can pull this off. I've heard some people like Joel Klatt say on the Joel Klatt Show that they might burn the stadium down if they win this game. And Tennessee will explode. Knoxville they'll need to be ready for some chaos if they can win this one. Alabama has struggled on the road in the past. And we'll see how good this Alabama team really is, because this is their biggest test of the year. How well can they slow down the passing game? And I think that Bryce Young playing and not playing, that's still up in the air. That will be a huge factor. And I think not only if they trot Bryce Young out there, but let's say he doesn't have his fastball or he's not 100%. How much does that affect things? Who's to say? We'll see how things shake out on Saturday. In my prediction, I'm going Alabama. Some of you might say, that's a soft pick. It's not a good pick. I can't pick against Saban. Saban has made a career of winning and dominance in Tuscaloosa, and he's faced good teams before, and he's had circumstances that he's had to overcome, and by golly, he's done it every time, and I don't see any reason why this will be any different. Is Alabama capable of losing? Absolutely. Do I care if I get this pick wrong? No. I think it would be awesome to see Alabama go down, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think Alabama is going to come out on top, and I think they're going to prove that they are one of the best teams. And I think the program is what's going to triumph here. Let's move on. This one, we have a little Big 12 action. It's number 8 Oklahoma State versus number 13 TCU. This one is a 3:30 game on ABC. This one has some serious Big 12 title game implications. Let's take a look at the Cowboys. Oklahoma State, they are one of the few remaining undefeated teams in the country. Their offense is averaging 46.4 points per game, and they are putting up over 300 passing yards per game. And I believe, if I remember correctly, just a little over 100 rushing yards. So their offense is primarily down the field through the air. That's typical of what you'd expect of a Mike Gundy coached team. Quarterback Spencer Sanders, he is another talented veteran. He's been with this team a while. He's been in this system a while. He's really done a good job at learning this offense and growing in it. So I think he is key. How he protects the football and how well he plays can make or break this game. Looking at defense for the Pokes. Oklahoma State, they are allowing 24.8 points per game. This defense leads the Big 12 in sacks with 16 on the year. If they are able to effectively get pressure on TCU's Max Duggan, who has been playing at a very high level, that will give them an even better chance. They're also, however, this defense is allowing the most passing yards per game in the Big 12. We'll come to see when we look at TCU why that could be a problem. TCU, looking at what they did last week, they're coming off a road win over Kansas, which is actually a big win. Not something you usually say. In case you didn't get the memo, folks, Kansas is here. But we're not talking about Kansas right now. We're talking about TCU. Their offense is on a roll. As you might have heard earlier, I mentioned them as one of the best offenses in the country, and I believe that. They're averaging 46.4 points per game and nearly 300 passing yards per game, as well as 230 rushing yards per game. So they can get it done through the air and on the ground. Max Duggan has the 5th highest QBR in the country, and he is playing at a very high level. On the defensive side of things for the Horned Frogs, they are holding opponents to 23.8 points per game. That ranks 5th in the Big 12. TCU allows the 3rd most passing yards per game in the Big 12. So both of these defenses are in the top 3 for the most passing yards allowed in the Big 12. Both of these teams have quarterbacks who've been around a while and have shown an ability to throw the ball, both of them averaging 300 passing yards per game. I think this is going to be lights out. This one's going to be a high scoring. I don't know what the over-under is, but I think it's going to be high. I think they're going to sling the ball all over the field. Now, they can sling it, and when that field shrinks down in the red zone, how will these defenses perform? That remains to be seen. Let's take a look at the football power index for this one. TCU has a 57.6% chance to win this one. That's a very slight. If you think of it as 50-50, that's only a 7.5% lean towards TCU. So it's very close. It's a slim margin here, according to the football power index. My prediction, I think the Horned Frogs get it done. I think TCU gets the win. I'm not totally sold on Oklahoma State. I'm not totally sold on their defense, which is led by Derek Mason. They gave up a lot of points to Central Michigan earlier in the year. Now this is a very good offense that they're facing in TCU. And I think that their weakness in the secondary for Oklahoma State will be their downfall in this one. And I think that it'll be a high-scoring affair, but I think TCU comes out on top, which will be another huge win for Sonny Dykes in his first year with the program. Taking a turn to our next game now, a little ACC action. It's number 15 North Carolina State versus number 18 Syracuse. This one is 3:30 game on the ACC network. Let's take a look at the Wolfpack first. They had a bounce-back win last week against Florida State. It was a close game. The week before that, they lost to Clemson, who is the class of the ACC. This offense is averaging 30.5 points per game for the Wolfpack, and they have been held in check the last few weeks. They scored 19 last week against Florida State, and against Clemson, they only scored 20. So they haven't even gotten greater than 20 points in the last 2 weeks. So that's what I mean when I say held in check. Quarterback Devin Leary, it's unclear of his status, so the injuries are starting to pile up for a lot of these teams I've talked about here. So it's unclear whether Leary will play this week. He suffered a shoulder injury last week. Now, while the offense has been kind of vanilla for NC State, and I think that's fair to say, the defense for the Wolfpack has been their strong suit. They are allowing 15.7 points per game, and that ranks second in the ACC. They're also holding opponents to 113 rushing yards per game, and we will see why, when we look at Syracuse, why that matters. Talking about the Orange, they are off to a tremendous start. Best start in 35 years, if I remember correctly. The offense for the Orange has been built on the rushing attack. Remember how good North Carolina State's rushing defense has been. They are averaging currently 190.4 rushing yards per game. They are scoring 38.4 points per game, and running back Sean Tucker is currently second in the ACC in rushing yards on the season. This defense for Syracuse has been lights out as well. They lead the ACC in points allowed per game and yards allowed per game. Looking at the Football Power Index now, Syracuse has a 58.7% chance to win this game. Given all that in mind, Syracuse has an ability to run the ball. They have something they do well offensively. I'm not sure North Carolina State has something they do well. They might have things that they do okay, but nothing that they do very well. Averaging 190 rushing yards a game is doing something well. Syracuse's defense, on the other side of things, leading their conference in points allowed per game and yards allowed per game, is great. North Carolina State has a great defense. The key matchup clearly is how well can North Carolina State's front seven slow down Sean Tucker and this Syracuse running room. If Syracuse is getting into the secondary and these safeties and corners are having to make tackles on Sean Tucker, it might be a long night for NC State and Dave Dorian. Coming to my pick, I'm going to take the Orange. I like Syracuse in this one. In a stadium I recently found out is no longer called the Carrier Dome, but it's the Carrier Dome, folks. Good for Syracuse. This would move them to, I believe, 6-0. Excuse me. I think this would be an absolute huge win. And, I root for the absolute best for Syracuse, and I hope that they can keep this winning going. So I'm going to take the Orange in this one to get a win at home. Another ranked-on-ranked matchup. Part of this great week in college football. And here we are with more ACC action. It's number 4 Clemson versus Florida State. This one is a 7:30 p.m. game, and it is on ABC. Now, I remember when this game used to have a little more star power to it, a little more rankings on both sides. This one's typically a ranked-on-ranked matchup, but that is not to say I'm not impressed with what Florida State's doing, and I'm rooting for them. I think I mentioned last week, of all the programs that are traditionally blue bloods who have kind of been down, who would I want to see back the most, whatever back means to you, quote unquote. I said Florida State. I think I want the Seminoles to be, I like it when Florida State is good. And Clemson is Clemson. We know what they are. They're number 4 in the country. That's a familiar territory for them. I know some people are not totally sold on the Tigers, but let's get into it, and let me tell you why you should be. They are in a familiar position, as I mentioned, sitting number 4 in the country. This offense, which was kind of the problem last year, they have been playing very well. They're averaging nearly 40 points per game and over 400 yards per game. DJ Uiagalelei threw 10 picks last year, 9 touchdowns last season, had more interceptions than touchdowns last season. He is playing like a whole different quarterback. His numbers show it, and just his play. If you go back and look at that Wake Forest game, some of those throws he's made down the stretch, I saw those and I thought, okay, this kid has improved. This guy has improved. Don't know why I call him a kid. I'm probably the same age as him, so I don't know what I'm doing here. This offense is well balanced as well, though. Let's not forget their running game. They can run the ball well, and a balanced approach on offense makes you harder to scheme against because there's multiple aspects of the game the opposing team has to worry about. Looking at the defensive side of the ball for Clemson, they are allowing 18.3 points per game and 319.7 yards per game. This run defense has held opponents to 64 yards per game on the season. Now, say what you want about their schedule or their conference. That's impressive no matter who you play. That is an impressive mark. I will stand on that. Looking at the Seminoles now, they look to get back on track after dropping 2 in a row. The offense for Florida State is rolling, especially on the ground. They're averaging over 200 yards rushing per game. This offense is also averaging 31.3 points per game. Over this offense is also third in the ACC in yards per game. So they've shown an ability to move the ball, particularly on the ground. So we'll see if they are able to do that. As I mentioned, Clemson's run defense has been elite. On defense, the Seminoles are playing well. They rank inside the top 5 in points allowed per game, yards allowed per game, and sacks. So those are some of the 3 biggest defensive stat categories you can have, and Florida State's a top 5 team in their conference in all of those spots. Looking at the Football Power Index now, Clemson is a 72.7% chance to win this game, and I'm going to go with the Tigers here. I think Florida State's improving. I think Mike Norvell's doing a good job. I think slowly but surely they're getting back to a point of respectability. I think that's how far Florida State kind of fell. I believe they lost to Jacksonville State in one of those years. Really kind of embarrassing stuff for this program. So I think it's going to take time, and it's going to be incremental, the build-up process. So I think Clemson, they're still the class of the ACC. They took down North Carolina State. They've taken down Wake Forest. Those teams were supposedly challengers to them. I don't see why Florida State is going to be any different. Now, crazier things have happened, but I think Clemson's playing at a much better level than they were a year ago, and I think that they're poised to get a win here. Moving on to our next game. Alrighty, moving on to our next game here. It is number 16, Mississippi State versus number 22, Kentucky. This one is a 7:30 p.m. game, and it is on the SEC Network. More ranked on ranked action, folks. Let's start with the Bulldogs. Mississippi State is coming off a big win over Arkansas. I know Arkansas slipped out of the polls, but they handled them pretty well, folks. This offense is rolling. I've been talking about Mississippi State. I feel like they've been in my pick'em almost every week, but they are averaging 38.5 points per game and over 350 passing yards per game. Quarterback Will Rogers leads the nation in passing yards and is second in passing touchdowns. So with Mike Leach, I could see this coming from the beginning of the year. With Mike Leach and a quarterback like Will Rogers, they've shown to be effective in moving the ball downfield, which is exactly what I thought would happen. Looking on the defensive side of the ball, they are allowing 21 points per game, giving up 358 yards per game, and they have forced 14 sacks on the year. That leads the SEC, folks. I bet you wouldn't have guessed that. Let's take a look at Kentucky now. Kentucky, they have been on a bit of a slide as of late. They've lost 2 in a row to Ole Miss and Syracuse. So, Ole Miss, not Old Miss. My apologies. Kentucky's kind of in a bit of a free-for-all. So I think when I look at this game, Kentucky's a team that's sort of trending down, and Mississippi State's a team that's trending up. So you're kind of getting 2 teams that are going in different directions. Will Levis did not play last week, but he is expected to play this week. I believe he was wearing a walking boot, so some trouble with either his ankle or his foot. But he's the key to this offense's success. They have not been able to run the ball. They are being held to 100 rushing yards per game, about that, less than that maybe even. So they have struggled to run the ball. I know Chris Rodriguez came back, I think, 2 weeks ago, so it might still be kind of getting into the system, getting kind of back into form, so to speak. But this offense is averaging 26.3 points per game and 356 yards per game. And like I mentioned, the run game has kind of been a little stagnant to start. So either that run game is going to get going or Levis is going to have to continue to play well. And you hate to see injuries hamper a player like Levis, who's so physically gifted, but that has been the case so far. Looking at the defense for the Wildcats, they are holding opponents to 16.3 points per game. That ranks 4th best in the SEC. This pass defense for Kentucky is holding opponents to their 3rd fewest passing yards per game in the SEC. So their secondary has played well. This will be the best quarterback they've played all year. This will be the best passing attack they've faced all year. No, they haven't played Tennessee yet. My mistake. I'm thinking to myself here. But that's the matchup here. Kentucky's secondary has got a big challenge on its hand. They've put up good numbers so far, but can they deliver? According to the Football Power Index, Mississippi State is favored. They have a 59.8% chance to win this game. I'm going to take the Bulldogs as well. I think Kentucky's good, but I think they're just going in the wrong direction. I don't think they have enough going for them right now, and I'm going to take the Bulldogs. Oh, here we go. This is a big one. Number 7 USC versus number 20 Utah. This one's 8 p.m. on Fox. Now, I think this one has been one that people have been talking about since the summer. This game, some may have lost its allure, with Utah having lost to Florida and UCLA. It seems like every time people have watched Utah this season in a big moment, they've lost. So might not be as high of expectations here, but let me tell you why you should still keep an eye on this game. Looking at USC, they have taken care of business so far. This offense is averaging 40 points per game and averaging 461 yards per game. Quarterback Caleb Williams has the 11th best QBR in the country. Running back Travis Dye is 2nd in the conference in rushing yards, and wide receiver Jordan Addison is 4th in receiving yards in the Pac-12. So, excuse me. Those are their big transfer guys, and they're all delivering. This offense, they can get you in a shootout, and they can score at will, put up yards, put up points, like no problem. Looking at the defensive side of the ball now, this team is leading the Pac-12 in points allowed, holding opponents to an average of 18.7 points per game, and they lead the nation in sacks with 24 on the year. So that sounds like, well, they do everything well. The offense is playing well, the defense is playing well. What's their disadvantage here? Let me tell you about Utah. Despite a loss last week for Utah, I believe that they are still one of the best in the Pac-12 if you just look at their roster as well as their coaching staff. This offense is averaging over 200 yards per game in both the passing and rushing games, so they have shown an ability to be dynamic, do a little bit of both, which is important. They're averaging 40 points per game, so both of them are averaging 40 points per game, so they've shown an ability to put up points. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is a higher scoring affair. Quarterback Cameron Rising has the 7th highest QBR in the country, and on defense for Utah, they are holding opponents to an average of 19 points per game and a Pac-12 best 315 yards per game. Now this one is in Salt Lake City. This one is in Utah. So according to ESPN's Football Power Index, they like Utah to win this one, 61.7% chance to win this game. Now, Utah's 2 losses to Florida, who, they're in a first year with a new coach, sort of kind of so-so. But UCLA is playing very well, and that's one of their losses. Now, can USC match that formula that teams have used to beat Utah? Or will Utah simply come out and maybe have a fire lit under them and play better? I'll tell you who I'm taking right now. I'm taking the Utes. I like Utah to win this game. I think the fact that it's on the road, and I think that we've seen USC be tested a little bit. That Oregon State game was probably the game where they got pushed the most, but we haven't really seen them play a very talented roster like Utah. No disrespect to Oregon State. I really like what Jonathan Smith is doing. We're actually going to take a look at them in just one moment. But I think Utah has the edge. I think they're going to turn things around here. But I think USC is a very good team, and they're in the right direction. But I don't know if it's just that they're due for a loss, but I think that USC, I think it'll be a great game. I think it will live up to the hype. But I think Utah, they're going to be motivated, extremely motivated to come out here and take care of business, and I think they will. Well, I told you it was happening. We're taking a look at the Beavers right now. It's Washington State versus Oregon State. This is a 9 p.m. Eastern Time kick, and this one can be seen on the Pac-12 network. Looking at Washington State, they are coming off a loss against that very good USC team we just previewed. Their offense for the Cougars is averaging 27 points per game and 370 yards per game. But their quarterback, Cameron Ward, he has been playing very well. He's been throwing for a lot of yards, but he has struggled with turning the ball over. And turnovers are never a recipe for success. This running game for Washington State, they average the least number of yards per game among Pac-12 teams. They are also struggling on third down as they convert less than 40% of their third downs on the season. On the defensive side of the ball for Washington State, they hold opponents to 371 yards per game. This defense ranks in the bottom 3 of the Pac-12 in passing yards allowed per game, but they are top 3 in rushing yards allowed per game and points allowed per game. And we'll see in a moment when we take a look at this Oregon State team why it's more important to be good against the run than the pass. Oregon State is not very strong in the pass. That's the spoiler. Oregon State last week, they had a rally to get a victory over Stanford, who's really just a mess right now. On offense, the Beavers' passing game has struggled, as I just mentioned. They average 249 yards per game, which leads the conference, and they lead the conference in interceptions. 249 passing yards per game does not lead the Pac-12, but they do lead in interceptions, which is not good, like we mentioned. The running game has been productive. They are averaging 181 yards per game on the ground, which is top 5 in the Pac-12. On the defensive side of things, the Beavers are holding opponents to 358 yards per game, which is 5th among Pac-12 schools. They also allow 27.2 points per game. Looking at the Football Power Index, Oregon State is favored here. They have a 62.3% chance to win this game, and I'm going to go with the Beavers. I like Washington State, but I think Oregon State, having this one at home, I think both of these teams struggle with turnovers, so I wouldn't be surprised if this one gets a little sloppy. They can run the ball well, and they're going up against a good rushing team. So this one could really go either way, but I like Oregon State. I think they're going to get the win. I think they have a better ability to sustain drives and move the football, and I think that they're in a better place. If you want to use USC as a litmus test, Oregon State was within 3 of them. Washington State, they had a tough loss. So I'll take Oregon State, but this one could go either way. And that's it for my pick'em this week. I want to give a special thanks to ESPN for providing all the stats and info that I use to help inform me to make my picks. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and watching. And I hope you all enjoy this wonderful, tremendous college football weekend we have ahead. Everybody enjoy. Hope your favorite team wins, unless, of course, they're playing my favorite team. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you back here next week.